How were the pyramids built in ancient Egypt? You will be shocked by the truth. We are used to thinking of pyramids as something mystical, created either by slaves or super civilizations. But what if I told you that the truth is much more surprising and complex? The real story of the construction of the pyramids is not a tale of whips or laser beams, but a hymn to human genius, organization, and incredible willpower. It is a story of how thousands of people, united by a common goal, were able to move mountains using only the simplest tools and a deep understanding of the laws of nature. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how ancient engineers achieved a level of precision that amazes even modern builders, and what simple but ingenious trick allowed them to move multi-ton blocks as if they were weightless. What I am about to reveal will change your perception of ancient builders forever. Forget for a moment about the size of the Pyramid of Cheops, because its main secret lies not in its height, but in its base. This colossal structure is oriented to the cardinal points with an accuracy of less than 1/10 of a degree, which is more accurate than many modern buildings. How did they achieve such incredible accuracy without compasses, satellites, or laser theodolites? Egyptologists believe that engineers used the starry sky. They could track the movement of a specific star around the pole and find the exact middle of its path, which gave them the true direction of north. This method required long nights of observation, patience, and complex geometric calculations. Just imagine a team of ancient astronomers drawing complex diagrams in the sand to perfectly align the future structure. It was precision work on which the success of the entire grand project depended. Each corner of its base is almost perfectly straight, 90 degrees. The sides differ from each other by only a few centimeters, with a total length of each side exceeding 230 meters. This is a level of accuracy that is difficult to replicate even with modern technology. They leveled the plateau itself for construction with the same incredible accuracy. The builders were able to create a network of shallow trenches, fill them with water, and mark the same level across the entire area. Then they simply scraped off everything above that mark, obtaining a perfectly horizontal surface. This proves that construction did not begin with brute force, but with the highest intellectual labor. Before the first stone was laid, a tremendous amount of planning and marking work was done. The pyramid was first built in the minds of its creators. They weren't just building a tomb. They were creating an eternal monument that would stand the test of millennia. Every detail, from the orientation of the stars to the leveling of the foundation, had a deep, sacred, and practical meaning. It was a dialogue with eternity, expressed in stone. It is in these seemingly insignificant details that the true genius of the ancient Egyptians lies. Their skill was so great that it gave rise to countless theories about outside intervention. But the truth is that it was done by humans. They understood that the strength of the entire structure depended on the perfection of its foundation. Any mistake at the very beginning would lead to disaster in the subsequent stages. Therefore, months, if not years, were spent on marking and preparation. All of this was just preparation for the main challenge, extracting and transporting millions of stone blocks. We would love to hear your opinion. What do you think is the most impressive aspect of the pyramid's construction, their size or their precision? Write about it in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about where these endless streams of stone came from? The bulk of the Great Pyramid of Giza, about 2.5 million blocks, was cut right here on the Giza Plateau. It was a logistically brilliant solution that saved a tremendous amount of time and effort. To extract limestone, workers used copper chisels and saws, as well as wooden wedges. They cut deep grooves into the rock and then inserted dry wedges into them. The wedges were then doused with water, and as the wood swelled, it created enormous pressure that broke off a smooth block from the rock. It was hard and monotonous work that required not so much strength as patience and skill. The workers acted in coordinated teams where everyone knew their task. They turned the plateau into a giant construction site with its own quarries. However, a special snow-white limestone was used for the outer cladding of the pyramid. It was quarried in Tura on the other bank of the Nile. This stone was of higher quality and allowed for the creation of a perfectly smooth surface that shone in the sun. The heaviest and strongest blocks were intended for the inner chambers and the sarcophagus. This was granite, which was delivered from Aswan, located almost 1,000 kilometers to the south. Some of these granite monoliths weighed more than 50 tons. In the granite quarries of Aswan, workers used an even more amazing technology. They did not cut the granite, but literally knocked it out of the rock with heavy balls of dolerite, a stone that was even harder than granite. Thousands of blows created a trench around the future block. It was incredibly laborious work, requiring months of hard labor to separate a single block. We can still see an unfinished obelisk in Aswan that cracked during extraction. This monument serves as a silent testimony to the titanic efforts of the ancient stonecutters. Each block was marked and numbered right in the quarry. The craftsmen indicated which part of the pyramid it was intended for. It was a complex logistics system that allowed the necessary blocks to be delivered to the construction site at the right time. After being separated from the rock, the block underwent initial processing. It was leveled and given an approximately correct shape. The final fitting took place directly at the construction site. Stone extraction was the first and one of the most ambitious stages of this mega project. An entire army of workers transformed silent rocks into building materials for eternity. But how did they manage to deliver these giant blocks to the foot of the pyramid, especially from distant Aswan? In the next chapter, you will learn about the secret waterways that turned the desert into a bustling port. Now, this is a secret you've definitely never heard of. For a long time, it remained a mystery how the Egyptians transported heavy granite blocks from Aswan and white limestone from Tura directly to the pyramids. Recent archaeological discoveries, including the diary of a builder named Merer, have revolutionized our understanding of this process. The secret was water. Ancient engineers did not drag stones across the desert. They made the most of the Nile, but not just its main channel. They created a complex system of canals and artificial harbors that brought water directly to the foot of the Giza Plateau. During the annual flooding of the Nile, the water rose, filling these canals. This allowed huge cargo ships loaded with multi-ton blocks to approach the construction site almost directly. The desert plateau was transformed into a bustling port for several months of the year. Merer's diary, found near the Red Sea, describes his team's work in detail. He was the leader of a group of 40 people who transported limestone from Tura to Giza. His notes are a unique eyewitness account, a real logbook of an ancient foreman. He writes about how they loaded blocks onto ships and how they traveled along the Nile and the canal system. He mentions the names of places that are known to archaeologists today. This was irrefutable proof of the existence of this developed water infrastructure. Archaeologists confirm this information by discovering the remains of an ancient harbor and barracks for workers and sailors. They found evidence of an entire port complex that was the center of all construction logistics. It was a city within a city, living to the rhythm of the Nile floods. This system of canals was as much an engineering marvel as the pyramids themselves. Its creation required enormous efforts to excavate soil and build dams. The Egyptians literally reshaped the landscape to subjugate the river to their grandiose goals. It was this waterway that was the key to the speed of construction. It allowed thousands of tons of materials to be delivered quickly and with minimal physical effort. Ships, not human backs, did the hardest work. Thus, the construction of the pyramids was closely linked to natural cycles. During the flood season, the full power of the logistical machine was directed towards delivering stone. The rest of the year, workers were engaged in quarrying and construction on the plateau itself. This ingenious system shows how deeply the Egyptians understood and utilized their environment. They did not fight nature, but put it to work for them. Their strength lay not only in their muscles, but also in their ability to see and exploit hidden opportunities. What you are about to learn seems ridiculously simple, but it is a brilliant solution. So ships delivered multi-ton blocks to the port at the foot of the plateau. But how to lift them from the harbor to the construction site itself? For this, the Egyptians used wooden sleds, or toboggans. The block was placed on sturdy sleds, and then dozens of workers pulled them with ropes. However, pulling such a load across dry sand would have been practically impossible. The sand would have created enormous friction, and the sleds would simply have gotten stuck in it. And here the Egyptians used a simple but incredibly effective trick. In one of the ancient images, you can see a man standing in front of the sled and pouring water on the sand right in front of them. For a long time, it was believed that this was just a ritual gesture. However, modern physicists have conducted experiments and proven that it was purely an engineering solution. It turns out that a strictly defined amount of water makes the sand much harder. Properly moistened sand reduces friction by almost half. The secret is that water creates so-called capillary bridges between the grains of sand. The grains stick together, forming a dense and smooth surface over which the sled glides much more easily. Too little water had no effect, and too much turned the sand into sticky mud. This means that the Egyptians had precise, practice-proven knowledge of the properties of materials. They did not act at random, but used a scientific approach. This simple man with a jug of water was as important a participant in the process as the 100 workers pulling the ropes. Thus, just a little water reduced the number of workers needed by almost half. This was another example of how intelligence and knowledge defeated brute force. It was an ingenious solution that did not require any complex mechanisms. The sleds were pulled along specially constructed roads paved with logs or compacted earth. All the logistics on site were carefully thought out. There were separate routes for empty and loaded sleds to avoid congestion. The workers pulled the sleds in unison, obeying the foreman's commands. It was a coordinated effort, similar to the work of rowers on a galley. Everyone knew their place in their task. Thus, block by block, the stone giants made their way from the water's edge to the place where they were destined to lie, at the foundation of the greatest structure of antiquity. But who were these people who carried out this titanic work? In the next chapter, we will learn that they were not slaves at all. A common myth popularized by Hollywood films paints a picture of thousands of emaciated slaves building the pyramids under the lash of a whip. However, archaeological evidence completely refutes this theory. The builders of the pyramids were free Egyptians, skilled workers, and craftsmen. Near the pyramids, archaeologists have excavated an entire city where these builders lived. They found the remains of houses, bakeries, breweries, and even copper workshops. Living conditions here were quite decent for that time. Analysis of the remains found showed that these people received high-quality food. Their diet consisted of bread, beer, fish, and meat. It was a high-calorie diet necessary for people engaged in heavy physical labor. Moreover, the workers received medical care. Archaeologists found skeletons with traces of complex and successfully healed fractures. This suggests that the health of the builders was taken care of, as every skilled worker was a valuable resource. Construction was not a chore. It was prestigious work in the service of the pharaoh, which was well paid. People from all over Egypt sought to get involved in this great construction project. The workers were organized into teams, or phylas, which were in turn divided into smaller brigades. Each team had its own name, such as Friends of Khufu or Drunkards of Menkaure. There was even a spirit of rivalry between the teams, which undoubtedly increased productivity. A permanent staff of skilled masons and engineers worked on the construction site all year round. During the Nile flood season, when agricultural work ceased, they were joined by thousands of peasants. For them, it was an opportunity to earn money and serve their divine ruler. Thus, the construction of the pyramids was a nationwide project that united the country. It was not a punishment, but a source of pride and stability. The people were not just building a tomb, they were building a symbol of the greatness of their civilization. This construction site was a real melting pot where experience and technology were exchanged. Young workers learned from experienced masters, passing on knowledge from generation to generation. It was here that the best engineers of ancient Egypt were forged. The realization that these magnificent structures were created by free and motivated people makes them even more impressive. This is a monument not to slave labor, but to the power of the human spirit, organization, and craftsmanship. What if I told you that the main mystery of the pyramids is not how they were built, but how the auxiliary structures were dismantled? Lifting millions of blocks to a great height was the most difficult task. It is clear that the Egyptians used ramps, but their exact design is still the subject of fierce debate. The simplest and most obvious theory suggests the existence of a single long, straight ramp leading from the ground to the top. However, calculations show that to maintain an acceptable slope, such a ramp would have to be more than a mile long. The amount of material required to build it would be comparable to the volume of the pyramid itself. Another popular theory is the winding ramp theory. According to this theory, the ramp, like a serpentine road, encircled the pyramid on all four sides, rising higher and higher as the structure grew. This solved the problem of length, but created other difficulties. Such a ramp would have hidden the edges of the pyramid, preventing engineers from checking their accuracy. Contemporary French architect Jean-Pierre Houdin has proposed an elegant and revolutionary hypothesis. He believes that the Egyptians used a combination of two ramps. The outer straight ramp was used to build the lower third of the pyramid, where the most massive blocks are located. But for the construction of the upper part, in his opinion, an internal spiral ramp was used. It was hidden inside the pyramid itself and rose upward in a spiral along its edges. This explains why there are no traces of giant ramps on the outside. This theory explains many mysteries, such as the strange voids discovered in the pyramid during scanning. Houdin believes that these are traces of an internal tunnel ramp. This hypothesis seems very convincing and is gaining more and more supporters. Perhaps a combination of all these methods was used depending on the stage of construction. Ancient engineers were pragmatists and could apply different solutions to different tasks. But how did they achieve perfect accuracy when laying blocks at such a height? In the next chapter, we will look at their simple but ingenious measuring instruments. We have already talked about the incredible precision with which the pyramids were oriented and aligned. But how did the builders manage to maintain this precision at every stage, laying block after block at a dizzying height? To do this, they used a set of simple but extremely effective tools based on the basic laws of physics. The main tool for checking horizontal surfaces was a water level. It could be a simple wooden trough filled with water. If the water level was the same along its entire length, it meant that the surface was perfectly horizontal. To level large areas, they could use a network of channels, as when preparing the foundation. An A-shaped level was used to check the horizontality of individual blocks. It was a simple wooden frame in the shape of the letter A, with a plumb line hanging from the top. When the legs of this level stood on a perfectly flat surface, the plumb line coincided with a special mark in the center of the crossbar. Any deviation indicated unevenness. This simple device made it possible to achieve perfect laying of each row. A wooden square was used to check right angles, the accuracy of which was verified by the stars or with the help of a rope Egyptian triangle. It was a triangle with sides of 3, 4, and 5 units, which always gave a perfectly right angle between sides 3 and 4. This technique is still used in construction today. The verticality of walls and edges was checked using a simple plumb line, a weight on a string. Under the action of gravity, the thread always pointed in a strictly vertical direction. By comparing the position of the wall with the plumb line, builders were able to erect perfectly straight walls. It was this combination of simple tools and deep knowledge that allowed them to create structures that even after 4,500 years remain the benchmark for the art of construction. Their legacy is proof that the human mind is capable of miracles. Today we see the pyramids as sand-colored step structures, but in ancient times they looked completely different. What we see now is only the inner core of the pyramid, its skeleton. Originally, all the pyramids were covered with perfectly polished white limestone from the quarries of Tura. These facing blocks were fitted together with such incredible precision that it was impossible to insert even a knife blade between them. They formed a single monolithic surface. In the sun, this white polished surface shone so brightly that according to ancient authors, it was visible for tens of kilometers. The pyramid looked like a giant crystal, an artificial mountain reflecting the rays of the god Ra. It was truly a dazzling sight. The top of the pyramid was crowned with a special pyramid-shaped stone called a pyramidion. It was often covered with electrum, an alloy of gold and silver. When the first rays of the rising sun hit the golden top, it flashed like a star, marking the beginning of a new day. Unfortunately, almost all of this magnificent cladding has been lost. In the Middle Ages, after a strong earthquake damaged the cladding, the inhabitants of Cairo carried off the polished blocks. They used them to build their houses and mosques. Today, we can only see small fragments of the original cladding at the foot of the Pyramid of Khafra. Looking at these perfectly smooth stones, one can only imagine what a grand impression the entire structure must have made. It was not just a pile of stones, but a work of art. The laying of the facing blocks was the final and most responsible stage of construction. The work was carried out from top to bottom as the construction ramps were dismantled. Each block was placed in its place and immediately polished to a mirror shine. The structure we see today is only a shadow of its former glory. But even in this form, it amazes the imagination and makes one think about the scale of the plans and achievements of ancient civilizations. The construction of the Great Pyramid was the most ambitious and complex project of its time. By modern standards, it can be compared to the Apollo program or the construction of the Panama Canal. This project required an unprecedented level of organization and resource management. At the head of it all was the chief architect, or chief of all the king's works. He was one of the most influential people in the state, combining the talents of an engineer, logistician, and manager. He was responsible for developing the plan and implementing it. An entire army of scribes, overseers, and craftsmen worked under his command. They kept strict records of everything: the number of blocks extracted, the tools issued, and the distribution of food. This bureaucratic machine was the backbone of the entire construction project. According to scientists' estimates, between 20,000 and 30,000 people were employed at the construction of the Pyramid of Cheops at any one time. But the total number of people involved in the project, including workers in distant quarries, sailors, bakers, and brewers, could have reached 100,000. This was a huge percentage of the entire population of ancient Egypt. Managing such a large number of people required a clear hierarchy and discipline. The entire workforce was divided into units with clearly defined tasks. This made it possible to avoid chaos and effectively coordinate the efforts of thousands of people. Logistics was key to everything. It was necessary to ensure the uninterrupted delivery of not only stone, but also food, water, tools, and wood. Any disruption in the supply chain could paralyze the entire construction project. The construction process itself was divided into distinct stages. While some teams were busy quarrying stone, others were building ramps, others were laying blocks, and still others were finishing them. It was a veritable conveyor belt, operating with remarkable efficiency. The Great Pyramid is not just a tomb. It is a monument to the organizational genius of an entire civilization, capable of mobilizing all its resources to achieve a single, incredibly ambitious goal. After all that has been said, the main question remains: why was such a colossal effort necessary? The answer lies in the worldview of the ancient Egyptians. For them, the pyramid was not just a tomb, but a complex mechanism for ensuring the pharaoh's eternal life. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was considered not just a king, but a living god, the embodiment of Horus on earth. After death, he was supposed to reunite with other gods, in particular with the sun god Ra. The stability and prosperity of all of Egypt depended on the pharaoh's well-being in the afterlife. The pyramid was his stairway to heaven. Its upward-pointing edges symbolized the frozen rays of the sun, along which the king's soul would ascend to heaven. Its entire structure and internal shafts were designed to facilitate this transition. Inside the pyramid, in granite sarcophagi, lay the remains of the pharaoh. The burial chambers were filled with everything necessary for eternal life: furniture, dishes, weapons, and food. The Egyptians believed that the king would need all of this in the afterlife. The construction of such a monument was also a powerful demonstration of the pharaoh's power and wealth. It was a way to show everyone, both his subjects and neighboring peoples, the greatness and immutability of the Egyptian state. A project of this scale could only be carried out by a very strong and centralized regime. As we have already mentioned, it was a nationwide project that contributed to the unity of the country. Working together on this sacred task strengthened social ties and a sense of belonging to a great civilization. It was an ideology embodied in stone. We have traveled back in time and attempted to lift the veil of mystery surrounding one of the greatest construction projects in human history. We saw that behind this grandiose achievement were not aliens or slaves, but free people armed with ingenious engineering solutions and profound knowledge. From perfect orientation by the stars to a complex system of channels and ramps, every stage of construction was thought out to the smallest detail. The history of the pyramids is a story of how human intelligence and organization can overcome any challenge, even the most incredible ones. It teaches us that true miracles are created not by magic, but by hard work, ingenuity, and belief in a common goal. What other mysteries of ancient civilizations would you like to solve? Suggest topics for future videos that you would be interested in seeing on our channel in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new exciting investigations.